There are a lot of things going on.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to begin. I'll get you to take your seats, please.
Back to Booze Allen.
And at this time, I'd like to call up Councilman Dyer and Lansdowne High School Daniel Flores. And Gene, come on up and lead us in the God bless America. Councilman Dyer is going to lead us in the prayer.
Thank you. Good morning. Welcome. God bless you. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us once together to promote unity, to promote civility, to promote good government. There are many challenges in the federal, state, and local government that we as a people, through your divine intercession, must implore and to bring us into a path of peace and prosperity. Pray for our soldiers in harm's way. Pray for our elected leaders in all levels of government, that they may do the right thing for the right reason. But most of all, empower everybody, the individuals in this room and others, to hold those accountable so that we may function in your light. For this we pray.
Amen. Figure out a way to stand up.
Please join me in saying something. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hello, stand up. It's so good to see all the students here today. Okay? With those young voices. It starts off a little funny. Maybe you've never heard of this story before. But a woman in World War II named Kate Smith used to start off this way. So you'll know that when the storm clouds gather from across the seas, let us all be thankful for this land so free. Let us all be grateful for this land so fair, as we raise our voices in the solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairie, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I'd like to recognize our high school students. So, would the students from Lansdowne please stand? Give them a round of applause. And then our students from Princess Anne High School, please stand. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to introduce our elected officials. Please help me in welcoming School Board Chairman Dan Edwards. School Board Member Patrick Sellier. School Board Member Sam Reed. City Councilman Bobby Dyer. Soil and Conservation Board Ms. Cynthia Pridmore. And last but never least, School Board Member Ashley McLeod. And at this time, I'm going to bring up Ashley. She's going to give a little update because she has to leave a little early. Come on, Ashley.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. I am thrilled to see so many students here. I have no partiality or anything to PA because my son's a freshman there, so I won't go too overboard. But I'm excited because I want to be on the school board again. because of these students. I love that you're here. I love that you're taking an active role in your government. You should be. That's what inspires me to want to continue the job I'm doing. What I've learned in these 3 years of serving on school board is that I am needed to be a leader in your community to make sure that the $700 million in taxes of your federal, local, and state tax dollars are being used wisely. You need me to help you do this, and I have information here how you can help me on my re-election campaign to make sure that I'm in place to be an advocate for you and the students and the other taxpayers who chose not to come to breakfast this morning. So please, make sure you get one of these flyers from me. I need your help. I want to represent you, and I want to represent the students and make sure we have a great workforce and productive citizens for our future generations. Thank you.
Okay, we have some candidates in the audience today. Help me introduce. I want to introduce at this time candidate for City Council at Large, Kenny Golden. And also we have a candidate for City Council Kensal District, Mr. Bill Dale. Have I missed anyone? Okay, great. At this time, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker today. Bring him on up. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest speaker this morning is U.S. Senate candidate from the 13th District. Please give a warm round of applause for Delegate Bob Marshall.
You know, I used to be a Democrat and I wasn't even up at this hour, so that's true. I grew up in a family where my parents were from Johnstown, Pennsylvania. They were what's called yellow dog Democrats, which means they would vote for a yellow dog before they would vote for a Republican. And I worked in the Kennedy campaign of 1960. I met President Truman when I was a kid. We saw him off when he left Washington when Eisenhower took over. I just had been involved with this for a long time, but in 1972 I watched the Democratic National Convention from front to finish, and at the end of that I decided not only was I no longer a Democrat, I was not on the same planet with these people, because there had been such a change from what I had grown up with. And I was kind of an independent floating around for a while, and the first Republican I helped and worked for was Ronald Reagan. And I was glad I did that, because he was someone who could combine both economic and social issues and had a view of the whole man in order to make his decisions. Now, why am I running for the United States Senate other than it's a way to avoid purgatory big time? I've been in office for 21 years. I have never voted for a tax increase. Can you hear me in the back? No. You want to hear me? Oh, okay. All right, I'll talk about it. Been in office for 21 years. I never voted for a tax increase. I have taken on fights with Democrats, Republicans, anybody who I found was deviating from the oath of the Constitution, which they took to serve you. Because the oath is a series of chains that you put on public officials to say that you will serve us, but only in these ways and these ways only. And you are the ones who have the responsibility and authority for changing the ground rules. I don't. I can simply propose them, but you must change them. So specifically, why am I running now, and why do I think I have a chance? Well, number one, I've already beaten Tim Kaine in public policy matters. That's important because Tim Kaine is the presumptive Democratic nominee. The first fight that I was in, the biggest fight with Tim Kaine, is one that occurred in 2007 and 2008, in which he and the Republican leadership supported a law that set up unelected taxing authorities in Northern Virginia and in Tidewater. The Hampton Roads Regional Transportation Authority, Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. Nobody was elected to any of these authorities. They were appointed. Now, in the 10th graders, do we have the standards of learning so you know what Magna Carta is? Okay, Latin for Great Charter. You know that King John met his medieval barons on a place in England called Runnymede. and they demanded of him at sword point that you will not raise taxes. And you know what he was raising taxes for? The Crusades, the wars in the Middle East. His brother was over there. King Richard the Lionheart. He was raising taxes, but he wasn't asking consent of the medieval barons and knights. And they brought him on this field. Sword point told him to sign this contract, just like that movie, The Godfather. Well, we politicians don't let you put us at sword point to get what you want anymore. But the point was taken. Transparency and accountability is what government is supposed to be about, because I am supposed to be your servant, not your master. You know the word servant is very close to another word, serpent. You just shift it, and you can shift the whole dynamic of what government is about. So I told my colleagues, if you go through with this, I'm going to sue you. And they thought I was like a Don Quixote, because it looked so hopeless. This passed overwhelmingly in the House and in the Senate, and then it passed on these amendments the governor put on. I raised $100,000 within 2 weeks when these authorities in Northern Virginia and Tidewater presumed to pass this law, this ordinance. I filed suit. My wife was a plaintiff with me. I was the chief plaintiff. The case was Marshall versus MBTA. I had a former delegate on there as well. We lost in the circuit court, and we won, however, in the Virginia Supreme Court. I attended the hearing down there. It was 7-0. And it was very delicious because Tim Kaine's own appointee delivered the decision. And they said, you cannot do this. What you're doing is you want to get something, you want to get taxes from the public, but you don't want to be responsible for it. Accountability. Transparency, you could not see when these little local groups are meeting. You can see when we're meeting, and we have rules for record votes. So both of these principles from Magna Carta were lost when the Democratic and Republican leadership decided to make this shortcut. And had I not sued, you and Tidewater would have paid $535 million in illegal, unconstitutional taxes. Because I had a 2-week window to sue. And in Northern Virginia, it's $1.2 billion at this point. Moreover, there would have been unelected taxing authorities for schools, for trash removal, for water control. All these are nice goals and ends, but they don't count because they step outside the means that you give us to do that. And there's a fight, in fact, going on right now about whether tolls should be used from the Midtown Tunnel to build another project. My case, Marshall versus MBTA, said you can't do that. Why? Because VDOT, they're appointed individuals. They're not chosen by the public to guard the public purse or even to make raids on it. And what they want to do is tax you on the tunnel to pay for another project. That's not a toll because you're not paying for the maintenance. That's a tax. You can't do that. And I sent a letter to put an article in the papers down here. So that's the number one thing. I preserve the foundational principles of representative government. Number two, in 2009, I was watching the debate that was going on in Washington over health care. Now, there are some reasons to be legitimately concerned about the delivery of health care and the cost. But again, only certain means are allowed to members of Congress. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution spells out all the delegated powers that the founders gave to the Congress, and which was ratified by the ratifying conventions in 12 of the 13 states. Rhode Island never sent a delegation to Philadelphia. They didn't ratify it at the time. They came in later. So, one of the powers which Mr. Obama suggested he had, and Congress claimed they had, was to compel you to sign a contract. Remember going back to King George, King John? There is no authority in the Constitution, nor could I find any case decided in the Supreme Court since 1789, which the conclusion was you could be compelled to sign a contract for anything, buying a candle, much less health care. So that was an act outside their powers. They don't have legitimate power to do that, even if the goal is legitimate. It's like saying, well, I need to make money for my family. You can do it by honest work, or you could be a bank robber, or you could be a politician. Right, what's the difference? Right. So, Mr. Obama did not have the authority to do this. I designed a law, which I call the Health Care Freedom Act, which said no Virginian may be compelled to purchase health insurance. It passed the Assembly. Attorney General Cuccinelli used this to sue Kathleen Sebelius as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. We won in the district court in Northern Virginia. We lost in the circuit court. And there's I think there were 14 judges on the circuit court in Richmond Court of Appeals. The computer, if you can believe this, randomly selected 3 Democratic judges. I thought this was a Democrat computer doing that because it shouldn't have happened that way. Anyway, it did. And my wife and I went to the hearing. We're sitting with the Solicitor General of the United States, this whole pack of attorneys, and just watching this from the ground level. And I listened to the questions, and I didn't like where the questions seemed to be going. And when the decision came out, I knew why I didn't like it. 2 of the judges, who were appointed by Mr. Obama, claimed that the state of Virginia cannot protect its citizens against excessive overreach, which we call, or actions of the federal government. Well, if you ever read the Federalist Papers, you guys know what the Federalist Papers are? It's a series of essays written by 3 people, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay, to justify the adoption of the Constitution. These were arguments in the newspapers. It's clearly stated in there that states, I think it's Madison who says, will be jealous, state legislatures specifically will be jealous guardians of the rights of the people. That means to defend you when there's overreach from Washington. These judges didn't even know that. So if you appoint me, vote for me, the 12th of June, and then later in November, if someone comes to me to be a federal judge, I'm going to give them a Q&A test on the Federalist Papers.
Yes.
And I'm going to give them a Q&A test on what's called Elliott's debates. That's the catalog of the record of the debates in the states for ratifying the convention. Because if you don't know the Constitution, I don't want you on there deciding that, because long after I would be gone from there, these judges are sitting on the bench. Moreover, they are not appointed for life. If you read the Constitution, it says they're appointed for good behavior. Well, pretending you're a standing constitutional convention is not good behavior, in my judgment. You're stealing. And stealing is against one of the commandments. You want to know how I decide things? I put the commandments first, the Declaration of Independence next, because that's the purpose of government. The Constitution is the structure of government, and the Federalist Papers is the explanation for the government. In that order. And that's how I make these decisions. Let's go to the third thing, where I beat, again, Tim Kaine was the chief leader for Obamacare, and he lost, because my law passed in Virginia with overwhelming Democratic support as well. Third point. Remember, the Declaration talks about the laws of nature and nature's God that the founders used to justify the break from England. Not their own laws. The laws of nature and nature's God. Among those laws is the arrangement called marriage, which is between one man and one woman, and it's in very early parts of Genesis. Some people attempt to change this. Well, you can decide who to marry, but you can't decide to change the terms of this contract. They are fixed. You can't alter it. It's like saying a geometry teacher wants to make a square circle. He's talking nonsense. It doesn't work. It's not bigotry to affirm the laws of morals and moral teachings that have been here for 6,000 years. Matter of fact, it is compassion. Because when you violate these laws, there are serious consequences for shortening your life, for significantly impairing your health, for increasing the amount of medical resources that we have to devote as a society to address these concerns because of this change in behavior. So in 2003, the Supreme Court decided that the sodomy laws of the states, which have been on the books since colonial times, and which was a felony, in all 50 states, or if you're Mr. Obama, you think it's 56 states, in all 50 states as late as 1960, and there were still 24 states that had these laws on the books. These were struck down. When that happened, I wrote an op-ed for the Richmond Times, and I said, I'm not going to let this happen in Virginia, and those forces in our society who think that 2 men or 2 women can marry each other, I want to make it as rough a road as I can for them to get any progress in Virginia. So I wrote a law, which we passed over Mark Warner's objection, said we're not going to recognize out-of-state civil unions. And the reason I did that is because civil union or domestic partnership is a proxy for marriage. The same people who want same-sex marriage argue in legislatures and administrative bodies for civil unions. Then when you grant this to them, they go to court and say, you didn't give us marriage. You're denying us equal protection of the 14th Amendment. So you can concede nothing in this arena. So I got that law passed. Tim Kaine opposed this. So, like I said, he wasn't the governor, he was lieutenant governor. I overrode Mark Warren. The Constitutional Marriage Amendment came, it takes 2 years, 2 times to pass. Has to pass in 2005 and 06. Tim Kaine opposed it, he lost. The Marriage Amendment got 153,000 more votes than Jim Webb did, who got about 8,500 votes more than George Allen did. So again, that's number 3 that you lose. The last is, when Tim Kaine was leading office in 2009, he was going to be chairman of the Democratic National Committee. His Social Services Board issued regulations that would have shut down private adoption agencies in Virginia, which did not want to adopt same-sex couples. How do I know this? These same regulations shut down Catholic charities in Illinois, District of Columbia, and Massachusetts. I found out about this, I alerted people, alerted the governor, attorney general. Those regulations were defeated, but that's what Tim Kaine did, and I beat him on all 4 of those. He also is criticizing people, specifically one of the candidates, for being the beneficiary of what's called anonymous money, where these political action committees are set up and you don't have the same disclosure rules. In 2009, when I saw that Obama had been collecting money without using the normal credit card safeguards, in other words, you put a debit card in with no name on it, give him money, and it's really George Smith, but it's Sally Smith putting the card in, this is not kosher. This is not the way to run a campaign for integrity. Washington Post pointed out that Obama got him almost $100 million this way in September 2008. So in 2009, I said, I don't want Virginia elections to be run the same way. I put in a bill that banned these anonymous cards. Who opposed it? Tim Kaine. I'm the only person who can go after Tim Kaine on these things. In 2009, when stimulus money was added to the Virginia budget, I voted no. Because I don't want our country to be dependent upon communist Chinese to tell us what we're doing. And it has happened in the past. Because in 1956, when France and Britain were trying to get back the Suez Canal, which had been nationalized by Gamal Abdel Nasser, the head of Egypt at the time, there was a war, and Israel was involved as well. The head of the exchequer, or the treasury in England, came to the United States for a loan from the IMF. Eisenhower said, you get the loan, but you pull out of Sinai. So the West lost control of the canal, and money was used, the debt, the World War II debt was going to be called in against Great Britain and France. We are in the same circumstance right now. Our revenues in 2022 will pay for the following programs: Social Security, Medicare, if unamended, Medicaid, and interest on the debt. If Mr. Bernanke has to increase the rate, what did I not say? Did you notice I didn't mention the military? You won't even be able to send a rowboat out from this port, much less a carrier group. There is no money. And all you folks in the 10th grade, my generation is using a credit card and strapping you with debt that you are not going to get out of. You've got to reverse this to protect this country. So those are some of the things I've done. The right to life. The first right that's mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson was opposed to abortion. If you want the history on it, I'll give it to you. I'm not going to give it here. Ronald Reagan thought we should link the right to life and the economic issues. He supported a human life statute which was put in by Henry Hyde, a congressman from Illinois. And there's an interesting story about that. In 1976, I took the results of a Freedom of Information request, which I found that about 276,000 abortions were paid for in a program that was supposed to prevent abortion. I thought this was how Washington works. I didn't like that. A friend of mine was a congressman, Bob Bauman. He and I were in a group called Young Americans for Freedom, founded by a guy named Bill Buckley. So I knew him through that. I pulled him off the floor of the House. I gave him the FOIA, and I said, we need to start a budget fight on this very point. Because the Democrats were locking up bills in committee that attempted to address this both in the House and the Senate. He said, okay, there's a freshman congressman from Illinois who I think is interested in this. Turned out to be Henry Hyde. So I gave him that suggestion. Henry Hyde wrote an amendment out, started this fight on the Hyde Amendment. Henry Hyde had a statute in that said, under the 14th Amendment, Congress can define human being. They defined human being as being protectable and gave the states the authority to protect unborn kids. Okay, I would do the same thing. We had a fight recently over the appointment of a judge, and there were some military individuals in the assembly who gave their reasons. The reason you could not appoint this particular individual as a judge, a number of reasons. One, besides breaking his oath of office, in 2004, he criticized every judge in Virginia as being biased against gays and lesbians. I reject that. I reject that plain and clear. He also said that politicians like Mr. Cuccinelli are walking on the backs of folks like himself. They're not doing that. So I thought he lacked the judicial temperament to be on the court. And you have to remember that it was a judge in a same-sex relationship in California, a federal judge, who invalidated a referendum where 7 million people voted for this. And on a television program recently, I was being interviewed on CNN, and I guess their ratings were flagging, so they wanted to boost them up. Well, I didn't anticipate this, but the interviewer was basically likening the efforts of the gay rights groups to the civil rights effort. There is no comparison at all. And what I said was, I said, Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks never put their name on a job application and misrepresented their past. I said, moreover, sodomy is not a civil right. And I, in fact, got an email from an African-American woman. She's a chemical engineer. She said, when I and my friends heard that, we jumped up and high-fived each other because the folks who were pushing the homosexual agenda never had the background that African-Americans did. They never had anybody under them or over them called masters. There were never any water fountains in Virginia labeled heterosexual only, but there were water fountains that did say whites and blacks. There were buses that black Americans could not ride. That never happened with other people. Now, all people are made in God's image, but not all behavior is equal. So those are some of the things we have to pay attention to. Let me mention this to you. I've overridden governors 4 times. Nobody else has done that. We need to beware that the election goes beyond June 12th. Why do I say that? Tim Kaine wants a candidate he can beat up. He wants a candidate who voted for debt, deficits, no child left behind, which intrudes into the states, takes away our authority, or who voted for hate crimes, or who voted for programs you can't pay for. I voted for none of those. He cannot beat me up the same way he can beat up my friend, George Allen. Now, maybe George Allen can overcome this, but it's going to make it harder. And remember in 2008, we had 3 Republicans lose because of the excesses of the Bush years in debt. Well, we have the reverse here now with 3 Republicans losing because they're going to have a rough time defending the Senate nominee if Tim Kaine can beat him up on this. That's something that you have to think about. Bob Dorn, one of the members of Congress I work for, sent me down to the House Library to read parliamentary manuals. I did it. They were like 8-10 feet thick. I used to find ways to give him amendments that we could put Tip O'Neill, the Democrat politician, Speaker of the House, in circles. Because if you know the rules, you can run the show. I helped Bob Dorn do that. I gave him these policy grenades. He threw them. I had to find out where they were, and I found out that these precedents were not overturned. So I have an aptitude for that. I've done it in the past. If you send me to the Senate, I will do it there. This year, and I will just point out 2 more things. New Year's Eve, when we were all celebrating with our families, Barack Obama signed a bill called the National Defense Authorization Act. And provision of this bill, put in by Republican senators and Democrat senators, said that the president, on his own, can single anybody out he wants in this country, including American citizens, and arrest them, not give them an attorney, not give them the ability to face their accuser, not give them any specific charges, all on the amorphous grounds of associated with terrorism or an associated group. What can this be? Let's pretend there's a thing called the Jerusalem Foundation, which you buy Christmas cards from, and you've done it for years. Let's say the board of directors is taken over by a group who was with Hezbollah and wants to blow up Israel. You don't know that. You write a $100 check, they write these checks and give it to Hezbollah to buy missiles to start, shelling the West Bank or whatever. You now have materially contributed, cooperated with a group associated with terrorism. You're guilty. You get no trial, you get no attorney, you get no specific charges. You're off the street, you disappear. Well, I had the Japanese American Citizens League support me because in World War II, 110,000 Japanese were taken off the streets of California. They lost their homes, their businesses, because they were put in detention camps. Because they weren't there, they didn't pay the real estate tax. You know what happened? Speculators bought up their property. You know what happened? The Japanese never got it back. Now, I don't want that to happen in America. I got the law passed in this state, and I got the John Birch Society and the ACLU and everybody in between supporting me. It says Virginia will not cooperate with this here, period. We're not going to do that. But let me mention one last thing. In order to avoid, the only way that you're going to get out of this possibility without massive tax increases is to develop the vast energy resources of the United States. Oil, natural gas, oil shale, and coal. You don't do that, we're not getting out. We send $770 billion a year overseas, some of it to countries who are very hostile to our interests. We do this for our energy appetites. Recently, Barack Obama rejected a pipeline coming into the United States. The philosophical background of what he's doing comes from people who think there's something called global warming. I call them environmental pagans, because they reverse the Old Testament statement, the earth was made for man. They think man was made for the earth. I disagree with that. They don't. Our Lord is higher than the things that are created. Whether you're Muslim, Catholic, Jewish, Protestant, Baptist, doesn't matter. We are part of creation. This was given to us to exploit for the common good. If we don't do this, we won't have the economic base to get out of this circumstance that we're in. And that's the only way to generate the money. There isn't any other way out of it. So if $770 billion doesn't leave the United States but stays here, that's jobs and tax revenue that we can use to pay for the programs that we have. So I've got the parliamentary ability. I don't mind being an SOB. That son of Benedict, I went to a Benedictine Catholic school. None of you nasty minds here should have jumped to a conclusion when I said that. And I'm willing to use it. I've done it here. Those who watch the General Assembly have seen that I've done it here. And when my own Republican leadership wanted me to vote for rules changes that made it hard for the public to find out what we're doing, I voted no. I was kicked off 2 chairmanships of subcommittees because I broke the leadership's aspirations to keep votes secret. I'd do it again. I'll do it in Washington. I just am of this disposition. If you go outside the rules, I'm going after you. So let me stop and try to answer some questions.
Okay, we'll take some questions from the floor. We'll begin right here with Brian.
Good morning, Delegate. I'm listening to Obama and liberal judges with the Defense of Marriage Act and find out they're suddenly states' rights advocates and they think